My name's Greg Ward. I'm the Learning and Development Manager for the Marketing and Sales Group here in Australia, and we're based in Melbourne. Enough of that. What we want to kick off in today is firstly probably what I call the Kickstarter, or what some might say is a thought provoker for us and get us thinking about the starting point. And recent research that's come from Culture Amp, who does a lot of work within the space of culture within the workplace and maximising employee engagement, is for those employees who don't feel they have access to clear development opportunities, what we'd call a career navigation path or a pathway for them, they're more than 40% more likely to leave the current company. So for those of us who are in the role of leading or managing people, that's a bit of a shake-up. As an individual, it's probably something that we're not aspiring to either. So you're going to have two perspectives for today. And one is that you'll either have the perspective of the manager, the leader, where you're looking at how can you do professional development pathways and planning along with your employees, or you're looking as the individual who is the employee and how can you take more control of your career pathway and utilize individual development plans and personal development plans to do that. So for you to keep in your mind, the perspective is quite important throughout, because there's slightly different lenses, as I think you'd appreciate. The areas we're going to touch on today is the importance of the planning for professional development for the individual and thereby the organisation. What are some strategies we can utilise for that? I'm just going to touch on two sort of relatively easy to follow formats without trying to keep the complexity out of the planning, because it's more likely to be implemented. Some research that exists around what are the competencies we should be developing as individuals. And this is current research suggesting where should we be investing our time and energy to make ourselves more attractive as an organisation or as individuals. And fourthly, what are some of the options and the considerations for professional development that are available to the individual and to organisations? So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about two areas. One is, or the areas can be considered as an individual development plan or a professional development plan. Ideally, we'll be considering them as individual because each individual will have different aspirations and different goals than each other, I suppose, and they're not all organisational. And they're largely actionable documents. And this is probably historically one of the areas where professional development plans and individual development plans have fallen down historically. That is, they've been a little bit generic and they haven't put a lot of action. They've said this is what someone should be achieving, but not necessarily the steps they can take in order to take them to the next level. So a starting point for us might be this development plan. And the starting point we're going to look at is, where do we actually get our initiative from to actually think about it? And how can we drive this initiative within our team members? So again, depending on the perspective you have. One will be the self or situational awareness. So they're both elements of emotional intelligence, but how aware is the person of their potential? How aware is the individual of the opportunities that exist to them? Can they read the tea leaves, which is what we call situational awareness? Do they know what the business or organisation needs? And have they got a heightened awareness as to how they can access that? So that's the first area. How aware are they of the opportunities, or how aware are we as individuals of the opportunities that are available to us to develop within the organisation we're in? The second part will always involve some personal reflection. Does the individual want to progress? And if so, what are their reasons for progressing? So what is their why? And it might be changing in of lifestyle. It's not uncommon for people who start to expand in their family structure, that they realise that they're going to start to have to keep the wolves from the door, feeding more than one mouth, feeding more than two mouths, etc., and realising that career aspirations might be tied to remuneration. And so that requires some personal reflection. Thirdly is goal setting. It always comes in there with personal development and professional development planning. And the goals that they might want to set for themselves, are those goals ambitious enough? Are they realistic goals? This is where the role of the mentor or the manager can play a key part for them. So what are the goals that we might have? And are those goals ambitious enough? Are they wildly ambitious? And fourthly, what role can the managers and leaders take? Do they require some counselling and mentoring? Each of these 4 points, I suppose we might say, is where the initiation comes from for these development plans. Being aware of the need to change or the need to develop, reflecting on historically what's happened and what we might want to happen moving forward, the goals that we might have moving forwards in terms of our career, and fourthly, those people that might advise us or suggest to us that we can move on. So the benefits of a plan rather than just going with the flow, and because going with the flow, as we'll see later on with a quote from Gary Ryan Blair, usually doesn't have the individual at the forefront of the development of the company. They aren't always hand in hand, especially in large organizations. So there are benefits to development plans, and some of those is that they can help guide the employee. Firstly, it helps provide their personal growth and guide their employee growth. Without some sort of development plan, they can be somewhat aimless or rudderless, we might say, and be at the whim of what's happening around them rather than taking more control. Another huge benefit of personal development, individual development plans, is that the manager gets involved in the PD process, and the manager can take on, as I mentioned earlier, the manager can take on a bit of a guide, counsellor, mentor type role, and they can also be a bit of a check for them. They can help them steer them the right way. They can steer them with the right people. They can allow them access. They can help them network. So the managers can be involved in the process. Thirdly, another huge benefit is for the individual to be more responsible for their growth and development. It is not purely the role of management, leadership, HR to steer individuals the right direction. That's an admirable role that many leaders take on. But in many ways, it is the responsibility of the individual for their growth and development. The company can support them and assist them and provide the environment, but it will require initiative. Fourthly, a huge benefit, as you can see there, is the loyalty and productivity and retention data behind development plans supports them constantly. If individuals feel like they are being developed, if they feel they have a career pathway and it can be navigated and they are being rewarded or they're being acknowledged and recognized, their loyalty goes up, productivity goes up, and retention becomes a very sweet byproduct of that for the organization, because why would the person leave when all those things are happening for them? And lastly, we can align employee development with the company needs. This is a great opportunity to align the needs of the individual with the needs of the company. And there can be some massage in between these where one complements the other quite directly. So a career planning, this is a model that we've been working with some of our clients recently that are working in a sales representative role. So we just grab this as a classic example of what a simplistic career planning might look like. 4 steps for this person who's currently in the role of a sales representative to move up to what they think might be quite the lofty heights in the organization they're in of that of a business development manager. Now, for them to get through to this phase, there is where they need to go through the next step in their organization is currently as a sales manager. So for them to get to the role of sales manager, there are certain competencies that are required. There are certain KPIs that need to be achieved along the way. And there are certain behaviours that are expected as well. If and when they are mapped out and clearly outlined for the individual, it makes it more manageable for them to get to that path. And then from sales manager to account manager, the same applies again, and from account manager in this instance to business development manager. Now, this can be adapted, of course, and it's never, as a lot of us will know, it's not a linear progression. It's often quite staggered, as the graph on the left suggests there, following the staircase. So there will be some complexities along the way. There will be obstacles along the way. There'll be necessary development along the way. There'll be pain points. There'll be areas of progression. There might even be areas of regression. Ideally, they'll all be learning opportunities, which we'd love to think of in the world of professional development. But at least we can see that there is a tangible pathway for the individual to go. And as much as possible, those steps are outlined for them to progress. So first of the development plan strategies is we have a very simple three-step model. That is, what are the goals that are being set, the feedback that is available, and then being able to review that. So setting the goal, providing the feedback, and then providing the review. So this three-step development plan strategy might look at with goal setting. Now, as an individual, we'll need to ask ourselves these questions. As a leader, manager, HR professional, we can ask them of the team member, of the individual as well. But within goal setting, as we have the individual setting goals or help them set goals, why are these goals being chosen? So what is the driver behind these goals? Yeah, as we know in goal setting, and many people would be familiar with, the larger the why, the easier the how. And so it may be their ambition for upscaling their remuneration package because their family expansion or their family model's changing, or they're just going to be taking out a mortgage, or they want to see that they have progressed. So why these goals? For each of these goals, can they be broken down? Because sometimes goals can seem extremely large or extremely ambitious. So in the instance of the previous slide where we looked at the sales representative, eventually looking at business development manager, we can break it down to the smaller steps in between where they become a sales manager and an account manager, but they can be broken down even further again. The advantage of breaking down the goals is that it makes little wins more possible rather than large chunks. But important in this goal setting exercise as well is what challenges may arise. And this is not being what some people refer to as the negative Nelly. It's a bit of a reality check that the individual needs to have, and or the mentor, coach, HR manager needs to be involved with, as well as what are some of the challenges you may face along the way, and are you equipped for those challenges? So this becomes the goal setting exercise. So it's quite a bit of a fleshing out exercise by itself. Feedback allows an opportunity between the manager or the leader and the employee to look at where are they at, what's progressing, how are things going, and they start bouncing the goals off the manager to say, well, what are your insights as well? So we get another look from another lens. So for the individual to get a look from someone who might have been in the role before, or someone who's seen that role, someone progressed to that role before, gives them better insight or a different perspective rather than just their own view from one point. And reviewing is a regular check-in. So the review process is irregular. It's not a once-off review. It's not like a quarterly review. If it's a career or an ambition that the individual has, the manager can use regular check-ins. And those regular check-ins, the frequency will depend on the size of the organisation and the availability of both parties. But with the check-ins, it's important if the manager has some predetermined questions and some mapping tools or tracking tools to try and remain as objective while still remaining supportive throughout. So that's our three-step plan: the goal setting, getting feedback between the manager and employee to get their insights, and that's a bit of a reality check in some regards too, and then reviewing the progress check-ins on how things are going. Because as most of us know, these moves between within a career path can take a period of time, can be weeks, can be months, can be years. So the check-ins would probably align, the frequency and scheduling would align with the time frame. Another template we use for an individual development plan this is a very simple template. You can see here we've got 6 steps within it. Then we take the person's details, so a very simple template. Who are they? What's their current title or role? Who's their line manager at the moment? And again, this is often used from a manager's perspective or from HR's perspective. What are their career goals? What are the ambitions and mid and longer term? And this can be done, of course, as an interview, a career type interview, a quarterly review or a fortnightly review, whenever your reviews are taking place. So what are the career goals or ambitions they might have? And stretch these out as long as possible, because the longer their vision, I suppose, in many ways, the more we're talking about a greater chance of retaining the right talent. What are the existing strengths and areas they should be developing? So of the strengths that they have, should they be honing those and refining those? And are there areas to develop? excuse me. An action plan, what is the action plan? So now how do we make the progress on the goals? What are the steps that can be taken in order to achieve those goals, the career goals and ambitions? Fifthly, the time frame. And then lastly, what is the desirable outcome? What is the outcome that was achieved? So mapping it out at the end of the time frame, look at the outcomes that occur for each of those individual steps. So a 6-step process there we can utilise. Now, other strategies we can utilise for developing to accelerate. And in many ways, we've got to look at now we're moving away probably from a template format to a mentality format, is for the individual to move beyond their current comfort zone. So what is their comfort zone that they're in? And in that comfort zone, to make sure that they're not staying within their comfort zone, and staying within their comfort zone will restrict them, and they'll think only within the headspace that they currently have. As an individual, we can only do what we, as we say, we get what we get because we keep doing what we're doing. To move beyond the comfort zone would to be encourage us to outside of the existing format that we have, the existing mindset that we have, to what is possible rather than what is probable. And so to shift, there's a bit of a shift that's required here. Some great work that's been done on this from Carol Dweck, that many people might be familiar with, which talks about growth mindset, and more recently from Julia Galef, where she talks about a scout and a soldier mindset. So moving outside the comfort zone and making ourselves a bit uncomfortable, and this is where we'll start learning. Outside the comfort zone, we get known as what's called the learning zone. But the learning zone makes us feel a little bit uncomfortable at times because it's unfamiliar territory. And that's in many ways a good sign because we start responding to the stress that's taking place. The second one is appreciating the value of feedback. What is the feedback? And for the individual wanting to develop, and for the manager or leader wanting to develop their team, to embrace a culture of feedback where feedback becomes the norm. Without feedback, the individual is uncertain as to whether they're making the right developments, the right growth. Are they making steps in the right direction? Is what they're doing positive, or is it actually plateauing for them? So what is the feedback that's available, and try and develop that culture of feedback along with these personal development plans. And that's part of that check-in process I was discussing. And thirdly, again, it's the mentality frame of mind that we need to be in as well, is if and when someone doesn't hit a certain progression in their career, doesn't hit a certain goal by the time frame, and that's therefore they might not consider that they've made a win in that instance. What have they learned along the process? So what has been gained? And we refer to this, rather than looking at a gap analysis, we call it a gain analysis. A gap analysis reminds us of what we haven't achieved and where we should be, whereas a gain analysis encourages us to look in the revision mirror and look how far we've come. And that's the learning development that comes along. And some people might say it's trying to bring a positive out of a negative, but in many ways it's that they have progressed. They just might not have achieved, or we might not have achieved the goal by the time frame that we were aiming for and hoping for. But how far have we got? How much closer are we? So these are the more mentality components of it. So we have there a 3-step model, a 6-step model, and then some mindset to be around the growth and development that's going to be necessary to do an individual development plan, a professional development plan, and to be able to map it and to be able to maintain some semblance of sanity throughout. Now, I promised we'd look at some of the competencies that are being sought after, and Harvard Business Review and the Institute of Managers and Developers came up with these commonalities. So there's quite a few, but these had quite a bit of overlap as the competencies that are being sought after. Now, the competencies being sought after less and less. Now, there's going to be hard skills required in every role. So if someone's involved in retail, there's absolutely going to need to be some customer service skills in there, right? Dealing with difficult customers, it's going to need to be in there. So yes, there's going to be the hard skills, but it was astounding when we look at these figures here of how many of these skills or competencies are now what we refer to as softer skills, or behavioral skills rather than cognitive. So adaptability and agility. So how adaptable someone is, or agile, their ability to pivot and change. I think this really showed up. I think it's speaking of a recent history for all of us during a period of the COVID period with lockdown, etc., modifying businesses, working from home, modified workplace, hybrid workplace, online meetings, etc. So this adaptability and agility, tick or difficulty in coming to grasp with it. Critical thinking, so being able to think, and critical thinking aligns in many ways with another one diagonally to the right where we have decision making as well. So two of those more harder skills and more process driven. Creativity and innovation, resilience, negotiation skills, a harder skill, relationship building, what we might call a softer skill, empathy, and effective communication. Now, these are considered the sought after leadership competencies. Now, within each organization, of course, these aren't always going to shine. They're not always the ones that companies will say you must be able to demonstrate, resilience to be able to go to the next phase. However, and it's not always easy to do. There are courses, of course, we can do on resilience. They're quite varied and diverse if you were to delve into them. But we need to look at what are these competencies, how can I develop in each of these, and are they attractive in your organization that you're actually thinking about growing in? Then we want to look at what are the options for professional development that exist. We have down the left-hand side different options that are available. So we don't think one-dimensional professional development. And then on the right-hand side, what are the considerations, and not necessarily the pros and cons, but just considerations for each of them. So in networking, you've got to think about the access of the network and the availability to them, the individual motivation to go to networking events, guidance, which events to go to, the informality of it, being able to go to events that are less formal, and the specificity, is it as relevant to them as one would hope. Self-paced learning, grown hugely over the last 10 years. I think we're all familiar with that, where we can dial into any or log into an event or we can download, I should say, an event, watch it in our own leisure. We can put a series of events together and do it at our own pace where we want. That's self-determined, which requires self-motivation. We might need guidance as to what area we should go into. Remember, there's a tendency we have with our bias that we'll go to areas that we're comfortable with. And that's where bias plays a part in all training in many ways. That will probably, an individual is more likely to do a course or program or something that they're interested in. But if we go back to the areas where the competencies are, where they're needed, are they the ones they're going to be seeking out? And that's where guidance is so important. And the manager's role, the HR role, is important to steer them towards areas that might push them away or outside their comfort zone. A workshop or event, probably the one where many of us are most familiar with. But then again, what are the considerations? How do we select it? There's a sense of collegiality, which is a huge plus because there's more than one person doing the workshop or the event. They're there together and they can share experience. We get different perspectives. We also need to factor in the costing of it, the availability and the timing. A facilitated program or course. Now there's a level of commitment required from the individual or the organisation. Their involvement and their attendance will directly impact the learning that takes place. How much engagement is factored into the program or course? And what are the resources that are available? The good thing about a facilitated program or course is it usually has curated resources that support it. And then we have in-house mentoring and coaching that larger organisations, medium to large size organisations usually offer. And it's more specific. They can determine the access and availability and scheduling, and we're utilising internal IP. So it makes it more specific to the individual. Within each of these, it's important to understand that, and it's something the employee needs to be reminded of too as their manager. It's important it's a responsibility, as I mentioned before, that it should come from within. Ideally, it's going to come from within the individual, that they're going to be looking at how can I get better? How can I develop? What should I be doing to progress? What would I like to progress in? rather than what would you like me to be doing, Mr. Leader or Mr. Manager. It's nice to have that alignment, but it's great to have the initiative to come from within. When it comes from within, it's more likely to be followed through because it's their reason as well and their individual motivation. One of the other reasons we encourage is, as I mentioned earlier, Gary Ryan Blair's quote, and it's a large tattoo, I know, but if you fail to plan, you'll fall into someone else's plan. And they won't always have you as their number one priority. So it's a reminder for us to plan, or for individuals to have their own plan. And this is not speaking ill of the managers and the HR who have the good intent, but if they have a large organization, they cannot have every individual as number one priority because it just can't occur. So only the individual have themselves as number one priority, which is why we encourage them to develop their own plan in conjunction with their leader and or manager and or HR, depends how their organization is set up. Before we sort of wind up today, some of the programs, so just to be fair, just some of the programs, some of you are very familiar with the programs that we have. A quick snapshot of those we're currently running. Our leadership program, which is 4 modules of 5 sessions. Our sales accelerator program for those people who are trying to refine their sales skills or trying to formalize sales skills that were somewhat informal to begin with. The developing manager, as the name suggests, those people who are progressing to a stage where they could be and will be managing a process, procedures, or people. The modern coach, which is our new take on train the trainer, because the trainer of the past is the coach of today, and they need to be more modernized in the way they go about their coaching. And our most recent program is called Customer Service Excellence and Experience. I call it CSX2, which is how do we make the experience for the customer as meaningful as possible. So there's some of the programs you can see via our website at TMSG. Our next 2 webinars, and next month we'll be looking at effective sales behaviors, not necessarily the skill set. We touch on the skill set, but more so on the behaviors for effective sales. And following that, the following month, which will put us in October, is getting this culture thing right. How can we get that right within our teams and our organizations? So they're our next 2 that you can, of course, register for at any stage there. So thank you very much for your involvement today. Thanks very much for your participation and joining us. Appreciate your time and investment and attendance today, and look forward to you hopefully in the next session if it's relevant. Please feel free to reach out via email to me at any stage, greg@themarketingsalesgroup.com, and or via any inquiries through our website. Feel free also to subscribe to our blogs, which come out weekly, and we'd love to keep in touch with you that way. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great day.